Welcome to Steps to Democracy, a study guide. This video will briefly discuss some of the events that led to a democratic form of government in America. What is a democracy? It's a political system in which the supreme power lies in a body of citizens who can elect people to represent them. In other words, the power of government lies with the people in a democracy. Now, democracies go at least as far back as ancient Greece. The people of Athens established a direct democracy. In a direct democracy, the citizens of Athens would meet together in mass meetings to discuss public policies, laws, and elections. Then all the eligible people would vote on these issues. As you can imagine, a direct democracy would become much more difficult as the population grew. Now, the Romans chose to have a republic. Instead of every citizen voting on every issue, the people elected representatives that then went and voted for them in the Senate. The Romans also introduced the idea of rule of law. The idea that all laws apply equally to all citizens, no matter what their position, wealth, or lack of position and wealth. Some other democratic ideas were introduced by early philosophers. Thomas Aquinas was a Catholic priest, and he wrote that some natural laws were a part of human nature. They were things you had just simply because you were born a human being. He also claimed that these natural laws gave people certain rights that governments should not be allowed to take away. Thomas Hobbes, another early philosopher, had a different opinion. Hobbes argued that an absolute monarchy was the best form of government. He believed that people were inherently selfish, and they needed the government to direct them so that they could live a good life. Two other philosophers that arose during the Enlightenment, that's a time when scientific reasoning became popular, discussed their views of government. Now, John Locke argued that people are born with natural rights, rights you have just because you're born human, like life, liberty, and property, and it is government's purpose to protect those rights. He also claimed that governments are based on a social contract, or an agreement between the rulers or government and the people. People agree to follow certain laws as long as the government agrees to protect their rights. Now, Thomas Jefferson really liked John Locke's ideas, and he included many of them in the Declaration of Independence. Charles de Montesquieu, a French philosopher, claimed that England's government was the best because it included separation of powers. That was power that was shared between the king and Parliament, which consisted of two houses, the House of Lords and the House of Commons. He believed that power shared kept governments from abusing people's natural rights. Now, there were many historical events that led Americans to the choice of a democratic form of government and choosing a republic or a representative form of government. Here are a few of the most significant. In 13th century England, the king had absolute power over the nobles and peasants. And the king at that time, King John, was bankrupting his nobles by fighting so many wars. In the year 1215, the English nobles had reached their breaking point, and when John called for his nobles to send even more men and money to fight, they refused. And they refused to support him until he agreed to sign the Magna Carta. Now that means a great charter. The Magna Carta limited the king's power for the very first time and guaranteed certain rights and protections to the English noblemen. Those are the wealthy people in England. In 1619, the House of Burgesses was established in Jamestown, Virginia. It was the first permanent English settlement in America. The colony had been given permission by the king to elect representatives to vote on laws for the day-to-day running of the colony. Each representative was called a burgess. When they met together to discuss and vote on laws, they met in the House of Burgesses, which is similar to our House of Representatives today. The representative form of government served as a model for many other colonial legislatures, and this was the first example of representative government in the English colonies. In 1620, the Mayflower, a ship carrying the Pilgrims to Virginia, was blown off course during a storm and landed just off Plymouth, Massachusetts. The Pilgrims made the decision to stay in Massachusetts, but before leaving their ship, they wrote a document that stated the purpose of their colony, their loyalty to the king, their process for choosing leaders, and their agreement to follow the laws. Every family had to have a representative sign the agreement before they were allowed to leave the ship. This agreement was called the Mayflower Compact. The Mayflower Compact was one of the first examples of self-rule or self-government in America. The colony of Connecticut was the first colony that produced a written constitution. It was written in the year 1639. It was called the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut, and it limited the powers of the colonial government. It also ensured that any powers that were not specifically given to the colony were retained by the towns and the people. This was an early example of a limited government in America. In 1689, the English Bill of Rights was passed by King William and Queen Mary. This bill expanded the protected rights from the Magna Carta to include all English citizens. It also made Parliament more powerful than the king. A few of the protections that were offered to English citizens were the right to a trial by jury and the outlaw of cruel and unusual punishment. Both of those ideas were also included in the American Bill of Rights. Many of these democratic ideas were used to write the Declaration of Independence and were included in the Constitution of the United States. And now you know some of the steps that led to democracy in America.